he walked away, left Germany behind, built a life his way. Rachel, Nevada, dust and light, jets in the sky, no aliens inside. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland resort for 30 years strong, Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts, his legacy. Signals run wild, YouTube in his heart, camera live. The FBI came but they can't break him down, his fire keeps burning, it won't drown. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will. Legacy.
Well, howdy folks, here we are again. Oh, the mic is a little hot here, looks like. I'm gonna have to take that back a little bit. Thanks for joining me again for another exciting Area 51 live stream. Today the guest is TD Barnes. Of course, everybody will know who that is. He is the real deal. TD is a guy who has actually worked at Area 51. He's lived it. He is the real deal, and you will be able to ask him questions in the second part of the stream. But it even gets better. So wait, it gets better. Here is Peter Merlin, live in the Rachel studio. Hey, Peter, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, this is going to be a really exciting stream. Peter is, of course, a surprise guest in this. So we'll be talking about Area 51 and his research, TD's time at Area 51. And with that, we're going to... Oh, and by the way, big shout out also to Dragon Rose, who will be moderating the chat again. So if you guys get too rowdy, Dragon Rose will rope you in. Thank you. Thank you, Linda, for doing this again. And with this, I'm going to hope I hit the right button. Hello, TD, and welcome to the live stream.
Good evening. Let's have some fun.
Thank you so much for doing this. I mean, this is absolutely awesome. It doesn't get any better than this. Thank you so much for being in the live stream. I'm just glad we were able to do it. You know, we never thought we'd be able to talk about it, but we can. This is so awesome. And, you know, folks out there, TD is the real deal. He has worked out there in the 60s. TD by trade is a radar operator. As such, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you worked at Area 51 as a radar operator. So let's first of all, let's set the stage a little bit. Why is there an Area 51? What prompted all this before we talk about how you got there?
Want me to take this one, TD?
I'm sorry.
Well, I'll give a little brief intro, TD, and then I'll let you run with it.
Sure.
For folks who don't know, the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, established an air base at Groom Lake, Nevada, in 1955 as a test site for the U-2 spy plane, and that's where the plane was tested and the pilots were trained before they were deployed overseas. And I'm sure that TD will be able to tell a lot of stories about the Cold War and why they needed to have the U-2 spy plane, because he lived through those times out there, and he's the guy to talk to.
So how did you get involved with Area 51, TD?
The need for Area 51 actually started at the end of World War II with the Russians. They were put up the Iron Curtain and became an adversary. And they were claiming they had more missiles, more bombers than we had, and they became a threat. And we needed to find out what was going on. We were scared to death of them. And we flying ferret flights into Russia, and we lost over 400 crewmen flying into Russia to see what was going on behind the Iron Curtain. So we decided we needed a plane that could fly over the uh, Russian air defenses, and we came up with the U-2. But Eisenhower decided that when we did the U-2, that it would be a civilian operation, not military. Because if it was military and they got shot down over Russia, it'd be an act of war. So it became a civilian intelligence gathering operation. And to correct Pete a little bit, we never called it an air base. It was a test facility because we did not want to appear to be military in any form whatsoever. We were strictly civilian. We had Air Force there, but they worked strictly for the CIA. They were not allowed to report up the chain of command to the Air Force whatsoever. They worked for the CIA. And what they did, I'll clarify a little bit, what they did, they took care of the chase planes, maintained the facility. I'm guilty of calling it a base too. I'm just used to doing that. But they maintained the facility, the mess hall, the security, all that kind of stuff. But they had absolutely nothing to do with the CIA operations, which was test flying the U-2 and later on the A-12 plane. That was strictly a CIA operation. So we had two departments there. You might say the mayor of the place was Air Force, but it was for the CIA. But anyway, they and it first started out with when Eisenhower showed the CIA, we developed the Development Project Division, and that later became the Office of Special Activities. That's what we operated under. And later that became the Director of Science and Technology, but it was purely a CIA operation.
When the U-2 activities were taking place there in the 1950s, there was a little bit of a cultural clash between the Air Force people and the civilians because they had wanted to have whoever was the commander of the detachment that was undergoing training at the time as the commander of the airfield. And that was typically someone with a lot of background in Air Force. They didn't really know how to deal with this hybrid kind of culture of civilians and military working together like that. So there was a little bit of a clash. It took them a while to iron out the kinks there.
That's very true. CIA finally had to intervene. And how this works, so the listeners know, the Air Force would suggest its best pilots to the CIA for flying. It started out as Watertown, and only 1 out of 4 qualified met the CIA criteria. And what we call it sheep dipping, they resigned their commissions out of the Air Force and went to work as contractors for the CIA. But they had a Air Force boss, and the Air Force guy would try to make them act like this Air Force, and hey, screw you, we're civilians now, and so it was a conflict. We had a lot of problems with that. We had a lot of problems at the CIA and our Area 51 that we probably won't get into it tonight, but internally, turf protection. No one wanted CIA doing it. The Air Force believed if anything's flying, it should be Air Force flying. Why? And they highly resented it. And along with what Pete's saying, General LeMay tried to spy on the U-2 program. At first, he sent Colonel Doug Nelson to March Air Force Base, where was based in the U-2 guys out of, and they'd fly into Area 51 to fly the planes. And then later, Doug Nelson came out on the A-12 and actually came to Area 51, and he became one of us. In fact, he later became Major General, but he said Area 51 was the finest gentleman's flying club in the world. But we had a lot of conflicts, and that we could talk all day about that. Most of the presidents, the Congress, inside of the CIA, and with the Air Force.
And part of the unique situation there was that the CIA didn't want anyone to know that the agency was doing anything out there in Nevada. They had to hide behind a cover using the Atomic Energy
Exactly.
Commission. And so the AEC put out a press release saying that they were building this airstrip to support the atomic testing, and didn't want to, so the CIA didn't even admit that they were part of that publicly until 2010, when you went there to CIA headquarters, and they were finally able to say that after all those years.
That's that's when my wife found out where I worked and what I did. Was the CIA
That's
brought it,
amazing.
they flew us out there. It was a big deal. The directors gave us a big hug and pictures taken with us, and gave us this coin, and uh, and that's when they released the fact that they were even at Area 51. And everyone knew Area 51 was there, but the cover it was NASA, and they were flying the high altitude weather research,
Mhm.
and their U-2 planes actually had NASA decals on them. So the cover story that was NASA, but Mercury, the Atomic Energy Commission, was our cover. They provided the badges for us. We used their facilities for driver's license or haircuts, all that stuff. We go over to the Atomic Energy Commission, Atomic Bomb Range, and they were our cover. And
Oh,
anyone asked where we was working, oh, we were working out the test site, but was actually
oh,
working next door, right next to the atomic bombs.
a lot of people were skeptical about the NASA cover story, but NASA researchers went so far as to supply the U-2 guys with test instrumentation that they could take when they weren't carrying the camera gear. And so they actually ended up flying some real weather research flights, and the data was useful, and NASA published the reports, even mentioning that the U-2s were being operated out of Watertown Airstrip in Nevada.
Yeah, the one thing that was kind of interesting is four of the U-2 pilots selected were flying F-84s through the atomic bomb clouds out at the Nevada test site before they were chosen. So that we really were doing weather research, even though they were Air Force at the time.
So really, Area 51 was in many ways a clandestine basis right from the get-go for various reasons, to keep it from the enemy and also to keep the fact that the CIA was running the show from the public in general.
Less than 5% of the people ever working during the CIA era knew the CIA was even involved. They did not know. They
Yeah.
didn't have a need to know. It was that closely guarded. And like okay, imagine this, but at that time aircraft were flying probably 35,000 feet was average, for a commercial flight or so. Well, we were ordering flight instruments for 70,000 feet. And, the supplier said, what the hell you need that for? So we had to have everything had to have a covered excuse. And I'll give you a good example. I've still been working with the CIA historians and stuff up until now, and they still don't know a lot of the stuff we did. Well, a few months ago, they called me up and said, what world was Project Red Light? And I had to laugh because they had no idea. They said on a lot of the papers. Well, we had two projects for U-2 at Greenhorn, and for the
Shoehorn. It was shoehorn for the U-2.
yeah, and for the Oxcart, it was Red Light. But that was a project of buying or food, like commissary items or fuel or anything to support the facility, instead of having to tell the vendor where it was going or what it was for, what it's going to be used for, that kind of stuff. You stamped it Project Red Light, and that shut everybody up. No questions asked. And so everything had a cover like that.
So let's back up a little bit and let's talk about how you got onto the project at Area 51. You worked before you were at Area 51. I know you told me you worked the high range radar tracking station for the X-15.
My startup with the Area 51 was very, very unique. I was in the Army in 1960. I was way advanced into air defense missiles and radar. I'd been to three different schools, 2.5 years of school, and eight hours a day going to school and in college at night. And the uh, Russians had moved the Tall King radar into Cuba. We got indications that they had a new radar getting off of reflections of ICBMs that they were flying inside of Russia. We knew the Russians had a new radar, and they moved it to Cuba. So the CIA was flying Ghost plane of a C-97 out of Biggs Air Force Base, right next door to where I was stationed at Fort Bliss. And they recruited me, uh, Gene Poteet was head of it, and they recruited me to fly on the missions with them because I knew radar. And we would actually, and we called this Project Palladium. And we'd fly towards Cuba. They'd turn on, would make them turn on their Tall King radar, and we could electronically make it seeing one plane, 10 planes going, coming, whatever we wanted. But the real object was to test the sensibility, the capability of it. So we had a submarine off the coast of Cuba that would surface, or up to periscope depth. It would release a series of balloons, and they had different sizes of metal spears on them. And the object was to see what was the smallest sphere that their radar could detect. And that was Project Palladium. And we determined, the sensitivity of it. And what we determined, yes, they would be able to detect the blackbirds in time for the air defenses to come online and shoot them down. So we never flew another flight over Russia. But that was my introduction to, of course, I didn't know about it. I didn't know about the A-12. I didn't know about Area 51. All I knew was a classified assignment that I got to work with the CIA with. Well, that was my introduction. And once you ever get in, you're never out. So when I went to NASA, and you mentioned radar, we weren't really radar operators. You might say, with engineers. Like with the surface air missiles, you operated 3 radars at one time. You had your acquisition radar that located a target, and then you had an IFF that would identify it as friend or foe. And then if it was a foe, then you had your target tracking radar that you energized and started tracking the plane. And then if you shot a missile at it, you had another radar that tracked the missile. So you had 3 radars going there at one time. So we were much more than operators. We weren't just sitting there looking at a scope. We was actually conducting operations. We were flying at, trying to hit a target, flying a missile. About Mach 3.5 was the speed of the missile, and up to 150,000 feet. So that's what we're doing. And I participated in over 500 missile shots at White Sands before I went to NASA. Well, the reason they brought me to NASA was they were tracking the X-15 at Mach 6 and above. And they brought in an old Mod 2 radar that the Air Force used to have at the Cape. And they brought me in to be able to track that high speed X-15, and we're doing the XB-70 and the YF-12, and then occasionally we would do the A-12s on request. We didn't know what they were, but the CIA was notified us, we got something we want you to track today. The reason being is we had, our radar site had a velocity recorder. We could record the speed of a plane, which ordinary radar sites did not have that. None of your Sage air defense sites had that capability or any of them. So we could actually record the velocity of the A-12 to verify as it went through the various stages during development, Mach 1, Mach 2, and Mach 3. That we could certify it. And I'd close the door. It was classified thing. I still had my clearance. Locked the door, had a guy stand at the door so we can walk in the radar room. The radar wasn't really my job on the high range. I was more of a technical advisor. I was doing telemetry, radar, communications, the whole works, So, but I would operate the radar because I still had a clearance, and but we would do all kind of missions like that. And then they brought me out to the site. And they recruited me to go out there because they brought the Nike radar that I had gone to school in the Army with. I actually went down and helped them pick out the radar. We brought it out to Area 51, make it the primary radar, which was really going to be for the MiG programs that came later. But they were wanting to get some high altitude, high speed RCS, radar cross sections, of the A-12 before it left. So they brought me out there because none of the guys out there had ever tracked anything that fast. If you didn't get it on the horizon, it's coming in so fast, you'd never pick it up. So that was my specialty. They recruited me to go out there for that. And then I stayed on course for the MiG and the stealth and that kind of stuff.
When I was working for NASA in the capacity of a historian on contract, I came across a box of radar plots from the NASA high range, indicating various flights with the X-15, and I was very excited when I came across some of the ones that you had actually signed when you were working at the Beatty radar station. So that was kind of fun. I think I gave you one of
I
those at
have
one
them.
point.
Oh, he's got
I
it.
have
You
them.
got it?
I have them right here.
Yep.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah,
That's some real
I
history
really
there.
appreciate that. That all kind of our mission, all our mission detail and everything. Yeah, this is the treasure. I keep it right here in my desk.
And just to clarify that, what you just showed and everything else we're discussing today is unclassified information. So just to clarify, anybody's listening, we are only discussing unclassified information today. So no worries here. No beans are being spilled that shouldn't be spilled.
Yeah, I meant to mention that the CIA declassified uh, just virtually all that we did. There's still some stuff that we won't talk about.
Right.
Mainly, we're like where we was getting the MiGs that we had a lot of MiGs out there before. So we still don't reveal the countries that we got our MiGs from because they get in trouble with the Russians. But we can still carry a few secrets. But basically, all the programs and stuff like that is uh, declassified. And I'll give you a story on that. I guess it's been about 25 years ago now that when they started declassifying what the CIA did at Area 51, Dr. Robards, the chief historian out there, called me. He said, "We got a problem. When we boxed up everything in 1979 and turned it over to the Air Force, we stored it, all the photos, all the records at Norton Air Force Base. When they got ready to start declassifying it, Norton had lost all the records. So they didn't know back at headquarters all the details of what we did. And I was president of the Roadrunners International, which is the association of the guys that worked out there during the CI era. So they contacted me and they said, "Why don't you start a website and get the guys to write their stories?" And so I did. I'd have the pilots, the engineers, everyone wrote their stories of what they did at Area 51, and the CIA was able to harvest from those stories what we did. And then if they had a document back at headquarters, they didn't know what it meant, like the red light, Project Red Light or something. They'd fax it to me. I put it on the website, and so it would draw comments of what it was. So it was kind of an oral history program. And,
And
for years now, I've been going back to Langley about every 3 months, up into COVID. I haven't been since COVID. But I take pilots with me, engineers, and we go back and sit with the historians and public affairs and the air branch in the conference room and just talk. Yes, and that's how they recovered the legacy of what they did out there. And that's the reason
yeah,
I'm able to talk about it today.
I'm just posting the web address Roadrunners Internet. There's an I. I'm just posting the web address of the Roadrunners website. That website is really a great resource for anyone interested in the stories from those days. You started it, the Roadrunners contributed to it, and I have the honor of preserving it.
You've done a good job. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I was very excited to hear about the existence of the Roadrunners alumni organization back in 1997, and I was invited to go to one of the reunions and become an associate member, which was something you guys hadn't really had so much before. It was a great honor to because I'd been studying the history of Area 51 for so long, and to finally be able to meet the people, behind the stories, the people who'd actually been there, and eventually getting to work with you and help preserve that legacy through my articles, my books.
Pete has been able to contribute a lot to the legacy. We've had, it's funny, we got him and we got another aviation historian that we go to for technical. She's read every manual. She knows more about technology. We got certain people like Pete that we go to because they were more up to date on what had occurred out there because they've studied it and had the resources to do so. So we surrounded ourselves with smart people.
But I think it's just
But
ironic. It speaks to the secrecy that the historians today have to come to you for information that just was not available in any other way. Nobody, it didn't leak out. Nobody talked about it. It's only available in the heads of the people that lived it.
when we started the website, the CIA turned over all of its photographs that it had over to me to put on the website. Lockheed also provided photos, and we made them a public domain. We didn't try to keep them secret because we wanted to get the story out. We've been doing this for 25 years. And almost every day I hear from someone from CIA or something that had some connection with the program. There's not many of us left, but I heard today, I heard from one of the guys that worked with uh, Colonel Jack Ledford. He was the Air Force guy attached to the CIA that all of our pilots uh, reported to. But I hear from but mainly I hear from the kids, the grandkids and stuff. They're all friends of mine on Facebook now because they get to hear the story that their dad, their grandpa was never able to tell because up till they declassified, no one knew what we did, or like say my wife didn't even know until 2010.
It's funny that you mention that. I worked as a volunteer docent at the Blackbird Air Park in Palmdale, where we have the very first A-12 and an SR-71 and a D-21 and a U-2. And you get a lot of people coming out to visit the air park to see the airplanes, and sometimes you'd get an older couple, and there would be some man pointing and gesturing, and the wife's listening to what he's saying, and you go out there and you say, you look pretty excited about that, and invariably he'd say something like, my wife didn't know what I did all those years. I was out in the desert. She thought I had a girlfriend in Vegas. So now he was finally able to tell the story because these things were being declassified.
We had so many stories, and there's so many stories that never been told yet, human stories, and that's fun. That's fun. But when we used to have the Roadrunner reunions, we don't. There's not enough of us left now that we have them. But every time we'd have a reunion, the CIA would send a lot of people down, and just to listen and talk to the guys. And what they love to do at after hours, and we kind of shut down. A bunch of us sit around the round table and drinking beer and telling more stories. The CIA would be sitting; they just loved it to hear stories that had never hit the history books, the human stuff. But we had a lot of stories like that, and
That's
I'm
that's kind of
enjoying getting
the
to do that now. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's kind of the thing that, so many people, they're interested in the airplanes and the technology and all that stuff's very exciting, but none of that would happen without the people. It's all about the people who designed the plans, who came up with those ideas, who managed the things, and just the maintainers, everything. Pilots, engineers. There are so many stories, and we'll never get all of them because a lot of people have passed on before being able to share their stories
Exactly.
because things haven't been declassified yet.
The- I might talk a little bit about that because everything was compartmentalized and need to know out there. And I worked with a team of 23 people. We were special projects, and five of us was embedded by the CIA into EG&G special projects. And we flew up separate from the others. We flew up in the Queen Air, where the others flew out of Nellis. But we were part of the special projects team. But we worked together and we played together. All of us either had a boat on Lake Mead or had a cabin on Mount Charles. We worked up there, went up on Monday morning, came on Friday night. And we had to have something in common where we could sit around and talk about our boats or, that sort of thing. And the I'm trying to think what I lost my train of thought. Was going to, oh, uh, we after the A-12, while the U-2 was there, the A-12 was flying. That was all we had. But then they started bringing in the other projects like the Soviet MiGs and stuff. That all of a sudden the need to know kicked in. Like the Roadrunner guys, the Oxcart guys couldn't even come in my building. Once we got the MiGs, they didn't have a need to know. And all of a sudden, they just couldn't go in certain places they couldn't go, which before they could. But even as we got new, we call them customers, and what it'd be different aerospace companies doing prototypes or proof of concept, technology demonstrators, we call them platforms, that they were competing with each other, maybe for a Navy contract or an Air Force contract. And they'd work on these back at their home bases. Lockheed was down in California, Boeing up in Seattle. And they'd work on these prototypes and stuff and then bring them out to the area. Well, even my team, when we got to work, we'd be maybe working on with different customers, and we weren't allowed to even talk to each other about and you didn't ask. I mean, this is we thought nothing of it. You didn't ask, you didn't tell. We helped each other. You knew basically what they were doing, but you just say, "Yeah, who are you doing this for? Or how's it work?" Or that sort of thing. You didn't need to know. So that's even within our own little group. That's the way it worked, and that's really so difficult for the CIA to know what we did, because when we have a meeting, pencil and paper was not allowed, period. Because even you doodle Mickey Mouse on a piece of paper, that paper was top secret. And you had to go through all kind of paperwork then to get it classified. So we didn't allow notes. We didn't talk to each other. Even the pilots, when we deployed to Trinidad and was flying over Southeast Asia, the two pilots that would leave from Area 51, they rotated between Trinidad and Area 51. They didn't talk to each other about how their missions went. And I don't know. I won't get that. That's another story. I won't get you off your thread, but that's something we could talk about. But go ahead next.
Well,
I could talk all day.
I think we are already more than halfway through our segment. So if you're up for it, let's do another one.
Happens.
If you're up for it, TD, let's do another one of these days and dive deeper into some of this stuff. It definitely needs to be told, and I totally want to dive deeper into this. Today we can really only awesome.
It's part of our oral history. You know, we want it out there. Yeah. It helps. You know, not only the people that there's some people that need to know, and then others are just curious to know, but it needs to be known.
Yeah. And I think that explains also the need to know. Explains it is so ingrained in the people that work there. People are always asking me, how come nobody spills the beans? How come nobody, except for Bob Lazar, who, well, you know, that's a whole different story, but nobody who has really worked there ever spills the beans. Never. And how is that? It is because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it is because the people were selected for these projects in such a way that they would never hire somebody who shoots off his mouth.
They look at their families. The wife could get a person disqualified quicker than anything out there if they drank too much, or they gossiped too much, or if they were going to go complain about their husband gone all week. That got you disqualified immediately. So,
well, I mean, so that still blows me away. You flew away on Monday morning. You didn't return until Thursday or Friday night. And Doris, your wife, had no idea where you were going. And she was okay with that. How does that work?
The wife thought they didn't want to know, actually. They knew it was classified. And what it did, you know, and even with the kids, someone asked, where's your husband work? Well, they had to lie. First of all, they didn't know, but they had to lie. So pretty soon the wives got where they wouldn't even associate outside of our circle. And then, like I said, we had boats on Lake Mead or cabins. When we come home on Friday night, the wives have all the honey stuff done. We go play. We would immediately head out to the lake. We had cabin cruisers and that sort of thing, and we played out there. But we never got outside of our circles. We didn't feel comfortable on the outside. Kind of like policemen kind of bond together, firemen, but we much more. And that's where we're still bonded to this day, just as tight as we were back then. It created a family that we worked under secrecy, but the wives didn't want it. And when my wife finally found out that I was working on 85 miles away, she was mad. She said, because she thought I was working off some foreign country or something. I'd leave on Friday morning, have a briefcase. We all carried briefcases in those days, and I'd have a jacket. It'd be 104 degrees here in Las Vegas. And I'd be wearing the jacket and get on a plane and come home Friday night. She had no idea where I was. And now we could call home. I could call her from Area 51, but to reach me, she had to go through a contact out at Nellis, and then they'd relay a message to us. In other words, she didn't know where it's at.
I think that takes a lot of trust. And if I may say so, I was lucky enough and fortunate enough that you accepted me as well as Peter into the Roadrunners organization. And you can totally tell that there's a special bond between your group of Roadrunners and even with the families included. There's just a
Oh,
special bond there that just will never go
absolutely.
away.
I heard from Roger Anderson today. I heard from the widow of Dick Roussel. I heard from three of the kids today. Mostly had to do my posting I did on Facebook, but also by Christmas. I was wishing, but I know all the kids. Our kids bonded, and and
That's
then of
awesome.
course you guys know my daughter worked out there at Area 51 for the guys that worked for me, and we still can't. She and I still can't talk about what she did. 'Cause
Wow.
she doesn't talk.
Yeah.
Hey, but that's just,
Right.
and I don't ask her. I've never asked her. I'd never do that. Of course, in modern day they give lie detector test out there. They didn't when I was out there, but later on they started doing that. So I just never put her in a position of what are you working on? But I knew because she was basically because she worked for the guys that worked for me, and I would get invited to their classified picnics that they'd have here in Las Vegas. And I go out there like old home week. I'd see some of the guys that I'd worked with out there, and they'd moved up the chain. But I always stayed kind of in touch because I was on the Nellis support team and that kind of stuff. So I was always kind of in the loop in general. I didn't know the technical stuff, but I was always kind of in the loop because I did quite a bit of consulting. They didn't want to know this or that, and only the guys that was out there would know.
And in addition to the trust issue, I would imagine. I mean, if I were to do what you guys did out there, I would want to tell people what I did. I would be so proud of what I did, and I'm sure you guys were just
But
as proud. And you just can't tell anyone on the outside.
yeah, but you know what? It didn't mean that much to us. We were used to it. Let me give you another story. While I was with NASA, we had the X-15 would always launch over a lake bed off the B-52 in case it had a problem. It could land. But we had to land on Mud Lake up at Tonopah here in Nevada, and it's on Friday. And it didn't hurt the plane or anything. It just landed on the dry lake bed. They loaded up on a flatbed and brought it into Beatty, where we lived. Well, they weren't allowed. California forbid 18-wheelers from crossing Death Valley on weekends. The X-15 sat in my driveway all weekend. I didn't take a single photograph, not one. I could have. It wasn't classified.
Wow.
We just didn't even. It didn't. It wasn't a big deal,
Wow.
and we
Unbelievable.
just didn't. It wasn't a big deal back then.
I mean, you got this high-tech prototype X-plane sitting in your driveway. Folks, imagine that. That is absolutely unreal.
Well, the
When I
people come by and they look at it, and everything, but it sit there all weekend on flatbed and never took a photograph of it.
when I was
But
working for
there's very
NASA,
few photographs of us during that era. We just didn't. We didn't exist.
when I was working for NASA, we had some historic photos of the X-15 that landed on Mud Lake. When they dragged it through Beatty, somebody one of the NASA photographers got a picture of it sitting at a standard gas station,
Yeah,
and
yeah, I've seen that.
they had to put a license plate on the back of the X-15 to make the whole thing legal.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah, well,
You know,
that's how things work in those. You do what you got to do and get it done.
you, in truth, working on the NASA high range for me was much more challenging and exciting than Area 51 was. Because we were flying the X-15, the XB-70, the lunar landing vehicles, the lifting bodies that became the space shuttle. Every day we were flying something, and they were nail biters. We like an X-15. Everything that went to the moon on Apollo was tested in the X-15. Sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. So every mission was a nail biter. So it was much
They
more exciting than actually for me than working out of Area 51.
the pilots who flew the X-15 used to say that they had an emergency on almost every flight, and some of them said it was the only plane that they flew where they were happy when the engine shut off.
Yeah. the Most flights we would have a pilot sitting on the control console with us, so that when they got in trouble, the pilot could talk them down. They say, "Yeah, my cockpit's full of ammonia." "Ah, Joe, that always happens." Meanwhile, what the hell's going on, and that sort of thing. But he would calm the pilot down, and because that's right, very true. They were stuff worked and it didn't work. We weren't testing the X-15 necessarily. I'll never forget one mission. We had to be on site at 4:20 in the morning. Our mission was to catch meteorite dust from the meteorite storm that goes through in September. That just went through every year. It comes through, and we actually flew up and collected some meteorite dust with X-15 and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
the engineers attached some special pods to the wingtips that would
Little
open up
pods,
and collect
yeah,
the dust. Yeah.
take the little pods on that,
Amazing.
and
So
that
what if the
that
pod
that
doesn't
that
work? What if that brings down the aircraft? You never know in
that
advance. You just try
that
it
that
out.
particular mission got me in trouble because we we'd had a mission the day before, and usually after a mission we'd hit this change club for a beer. Pretty soon someone hit a jackpot on their slot machine, they'd buy another beer. We'd end up calling the wife, "Come on down, we're going to have dinner at the exchange club and have a steak and stuff." We stayed out late that night, the night before that mission, and then had to get up early, and my wife was grumbling about having to cook breakfast for me at 3:30 in the morning. I just teased them. I'm not really griping. Anyway, when the alarm went off, I had to reset the alarm for 30 minutes after I left. In other words, at 5 o'clock or so, and then slid it under the bed. So she had to get out of bed and turn it off. Well, I'll never forget that. That particular mission was unique. We didn't usually go in that early, and but we had to be in early for that particular one. But those were exciting days. I mean, that was like Pete said. Every mission was an emergency.
And I think it was also, correct me if I'm wrong again, but from what I'm hearing, there was probably also a lot less red tape back then to get things done. You just do what you got to do to get it done.
Absolutely. Even that Area 51, we didn't have that. There was no red tape. Whatever needed to be done, you did it. And like for example, and I just recently was talking about this, when we tested the injector seats for the A-12 to eject out of a Mach 3 plane, they'd gone through all kind of tests before at Edwards and different places, but they never had tested to actually inject it. We rented a Ford Thunderbird from a local Ford dealer here in Las Vegas. We had a trailer that we had our barbecue pit was on. It stayed behind the mess hall. Took the barbecue pit off. We put on the mock-up cockpit, hooked it onto the Thunderbird, raced out across the dry Groom Lake at about, I think, got up to 90 miles an hour, and launched the ejection seat to see if it worked. And
Wow.
it needed to be done. That's how we did it.
Exactly.
Pretty creative.
That's right.
You
Southern
know,
engineering.
sometimes I wonder if things like that still happen over there. I think it is still a little more relaxed than normal. Do they still have the freedom to do that?
They tried to unionize us, and of course, there's no way. So you couldn't classified word, compartmentalized. There's no way. So we got paid very well, and to keep us. So that was a hardship assignment.
Mhm.
So we'd go out there on Monday morning, and we'd work we'd draw an engineer pay, and we would work for 8 hours. Then we went on time and a half for 4 hours, and after that we went on double time, 24 hours a day until we came home Friday night. We were making some big bucks for that time.
Nice. I'm
But
glad you did.
They kept us happy. They furnished us snake-proof boots because there's rattlesnakes out there. They took care of. We had everything. The CIA was really, really great about it, and they still is. They're very family oriented. We had everything we could possibly need out there. Initially, they planned on the people living out there, and of course that didn't work out. We had families, and so they finally said, "Okay, you work up there all week, and you go home on weekends," and that's what we did. But initially, the people working out there couldn't even live in the state of Nevada, other than us with the CIA and our cooks and that kind of people. But like the pilots and all of them had to live out of state and commute in to work on Monday morning, so they lived in California
Wow.
because they didn't
Well,
want, you got to remember, Nevada only had like 286,000 people in the whole state. And they didn't, and anyone showing up in town was a stranger. And they didn't want a bunch of strange people moving into the communities and stuff. So they made everybody commute.
that makes a lot of sense. And there are still so many stories. We got to do another one of these, and I want to get deeper into life on base, how you guys lived out there, whatever you can talk about. I don't want you to talk about anything that you can't talk about.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
already at the 45-minute mark, and I
Oh
want to
my
start
God.
taking questions. We haven't even scratched the surface. There's so much I wanted to talk about. I mean, I see that stack of books behind, excuse me, behind you. You wrote all these books, some fiction, some non-fiction books about Area 51. I want to get into all of that in more detail, but I also want to give people an opportunity to ask you guys questions.
Yeah, the CIA was the one that prompted me to do the first books. I wrote a
Oh,
3-book series I'd say for the CIA, and that's what they use when they go back there, take the pilots and engineers back there. They use those books as their reference.
amazing.
They sell my books in the store there at Langley, but that's how we got a lot of stories out, is I put them in the books, and then the historians and stuff they had a reference in of what to ask the people when they come out there and for their oral history interviews.
Well, in the meantime, we're going to continue this absolutely. I want to, folks, if you want to post your questions in the chat to Peter or to TD, I'm going to read them out, and I'm sure they will be able to answer. We'll definitely continue this, and thank you both so much for doing this. I think
Sure.
we're having a good old time
Oh
here,
yeah, always fun.
Oh, I did.
and
I enjoyed it. I didn't realize the time had gone by so fast.
seriously, we're almost an hour into it already. So we'll definitely do another one. And in the meantime, folks, if you're curious about the Roadrunners, the link is in the description to this live stream. The link to TD's book, to the CIA book, CIA Station D is in the description. The link to Peter's Area 51 book is in the description. You got plenty to study, and there's stories, there's technical stuff, there's everything in those books and on the Roadrunners website. So we'll do another stream. Until then, there will be a quiz. So until then, learn everything about Area 51 that you can. So let's see if I have any questions here. I'm seeing a lot, by the way. I'm kind of glancing at the chat here, and I'm seeing a lot of my stream members, of my website, of my channel members here. Very, very happy to see you guys, and I'm seeing that everybody's all excited about the stream, and I'm really happy to see this echo.
Yeah, I can already see one question that someone has there about visiting one of the A-12 aircraft that's on display. It's really nice that many of the A-12 airplanes have survived the program and are on display in museums for the public to see. And the question apparently has to do with the fact that there are Air Force markings on a CIA plane. Well, that was part of the cover story to hide that the CIA was operating this spy plane. They painted them in USAF markings with Air Force serial numbers. And when they went on operational missions, the regular serial number was often stripped off and replaced with a bogus serial number. And I think one of the display aircraft actually has that on it on at least one side.
Let me comment on about that. We just repainted our plane at CIA headquarters, and they called me up and wanted to know why some of the A-12s had red paint on the tail numbers,
Yeah.
and others had white. Well, the reason was when we started flying, we flew three of the planes to Kadena to fly over Vietnam and South Korea. Well, the Russians had a trawler sitting right off the coast of Okinawa, and once we launched the plane, they were ready to go ahead to Hanau. Here they come. So what we were doing, we painted our tail numbers big old red numbers, and we changed the number every time they took off, so that the Russians would think, and the Korea think we had a whole fleet of planes. So anyway, we just got through painting. In fact, I got a message from CIA today. Notifying me they're going to give me credit for telling them why we had red tail numbers when they repainted the plane. But that was the reason, was a little bit of psyops. We did things like that.
Awesome. I love it. We have a question here from Gary. Why were the articles put on the poles upside down during RCS testing? Either one of you.
Do you want to take that one, TD? Okay, all right. Well, it was to give a view of the top of the aircraft, because the radar dish was down at ground level pretty much, or just shortly above. So you'd have to put if you wanted to look at the upper surface and get the radar measurement of the signature of the radar reflection, you had to mount it upside down. So it could be upright, it could be upside down, just depending on the nature of the radar test that was being done at the time. And sometimes you'll see that the engine nacelles have something sticking out the back, and that was to simulate the radar signature of the jet plume coming out the back of the engine.
Exactly. Yeah, the pose we put them on was two battleship drive shafts welded together, was our pose that we used to put the planes on. And like Frank said, Pete said, we had them at an angle where the radar looking at them would could see it as something flying. You gave it a true sense. It wasn't just something on the pole.
Right.
And talk about the pole. Talk about the pose. It finally got so bad. It wasn't with the A-12s. Later on, when we were doing stealth, that the background of the pose would interfere with the RCS. They see the pole more than they would the plane. So we ended up making our pose out of styrofoam. We actually had pylons made out of styrofoam that would put the prototypes on, because while we were doing stealth, it would get where the pole was getting more of the signature than the article sitting on top of it.
That's pretty damn good. So here's a question.
I could tell a lot of stories about that.
A question from Alexander, aka Sasha TM Squad, and this is a question. He prefaces it with, "If you can talk about it." He asks, "How was security back then compared to now? What measures were there?" And don't answer this if this is anything that you shouldn't be talking about.
It's totally different back then. You didn't have computers back then. You didn't have iPhones. You didn't have all the technology you got now. So
and
we
you
didn't.
probably didn't have
internet.
people on. You probably didn't have
So we
people
just
on mountaintops with long lenses either.
we had K9 dogs for a while.
Mhm.
We didn't keep them all the time, but for a while we had them. But mostly we had sensors out there around the perimeter, and then we had patrols. But we didn't really have that problem back then. That people didn't know existed. It wasn't until the Air Force took it over in 1979 that people really believed, started hearing about Area 51. And then they got to wonder, when they found out the CIA had been out there for over 20 years and no one knew about it. That's when all the imagination started kicking in. What were we doing? That's when all your UFO stories started, your aliens and stuff. But people's imagination of what we'd been doing for 20 years that no one knew about. But the story didn't start until the Air Force took over.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's one of the reasons to the CIA, too. We didn't have a chain of command. So like the Air Force, they have to report up the chain of command and everything to do. We didn't have that. we didn't talk to each other, much less up the chain of command. We had one guy we talked to at CIA headquarters, and that's it.
Okay. Uh, Jeff York has a question. Here's my question. Are there still things that that you, TD, can't discuss even today?
Not really, not about the project. We we've been cautioned, like I said earlier, about the Soviet MiGs. When we started doing Soviet MiGs, we were getting them from everywhere we could. A lot of them, not necessarily for the planes, but for spare parts. And we got from countries that, and um, and the Red Eagles was actually traded their pilots in countries that if it was revealed that they were doing so, they'd be in trouble with Russia. Uh, so we keep to protect them. We keep it secret. But as far as anything that we were actually doing out there, nothing like that. No, there's nothing.
I think a lot of that was, like Peter said earlier, back in 2012, was it? When
2010, when they,
2010, yeah, when you
yeah.
guys visited the CIA. I think that was when a lot of that stuff was, okay, now you can talk about it. Now it's so long ago that you can talk about it.
Yeah, CIA decided to classify it all, and we did a group of us did we did three presentations in the bubble. They call it the bubble at CIA. It's a big old auditorium like thing, but we spent 10 days with the CIA sponsoring it, going to all the intelligence agencies and the Smithsonian and places like that, giving lectures or panel discussions to the workforce and telling everything we did. And on a kind of humorous note, when the this wasn't all that long ago when the Defense Intelligence Agency, which we worked with also as one of our customers, when they put a logo in their lobby, like you got at CIA headquarters, well, the director invited me and Tony Bavaca back there to do a panel discussion to their workforce. And we had Tony and I were the director was the first one to walk across the big old logo in the lobby, and Tony and I were the second. We had that honor.
Uh,
But anyway, we
oh
gave
wow.
a discussion to their workforce. We're talking about Area 51 and all that kind of stuff. They told us later, we're not even allowed to say Area 51 here yet. This wasn't that long ago. Even though we talked, the CIA talked about, but they couldn't talk about it at the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Well, I'm glad they finally got that declassified. I'm just moving the screen around a little bit, just in case anybody's wondering. Uh, yeah, I'm glad they finally saw, okay, it's time, we can talk about it now. It seems like sometimes the security and the secrecy at Area 51 takes on a little bit of a life on its own, to where there is secrecy just for the sake of secrecy
But
sometimes.
one of the things that brought this on was modern day technology. They were reinventing the wheel. They were running into problems that we had run into back then that we had solved, but we couldn't tell anyone. So
Wow.
modern day aerospace companies were going back through the same thing again when we'd already done it. So that they
That
declassified a lot of the stuff, particularly having to do with Mach 3 flight, which is that's something different. Everything got hotter. Your windshield got about 485 degrees or so. The plane got really, really hot. And we had to deal with temperature, invent fuel. The hydraulics had to be invented. Everything had to be invented for that plane. And
what
and so even today, they still go back to what we did back then and see how we learned about it and corrected it. You
to
got something, Pete?
to the point about reinventing the wheel and the compartmentalization. Back in the mid 1970s, when the Air Force was looking at the idea of creating a stealth aircraft, something that could be virtually invisible to radar, uh, they invited various companies such as Northrop and McDonnell Douglas to participate in some of the early studies. Nobody thought to invite Lockheed because Lockheed had not produced a fighter plane in many years, and nobody knew about the secret stuff they did with the A-12 at Groom Lake and how they developed aircraft that were, relatively low
Yeah.
observable to radar at the time. So once the Lockheed folks at the Skunk Works found out that this competition was going on, they had to go to the CIA and say, "Hey, could you declassify a little bit of this so that we can share it
It-
and get
exactly.
in on this contract? That's how they got in with the Have
Oh,
Blue and the
oh,
F-117.
oh, the CIA was really, really deep in stealth. That was a requirement that the A-12 be a stealth plane. Well, there's no way we could make it truly stealth. We made it probably 90% stealth. But a plane that gets up to that as hot as it did, you can't hide that. You can't hide heat. You can hide the physical shape of it and all, but the infrared would pick it up like in a flash. So we never could make it truly a stealth plane. But we made the drone, the D-21 drone that we launched off the mothership. It was stealth, and then we worked on a lot of proof of concept platforms that weird looking stuff. Just as we were developing the CIA did, and this was done by the aerospace company. We didn't build anything out there. Lockheed, Boeing, the different companies was looking into the future, into stealth, and they build these prototypes and then bring them out to Area 51, where we had the equipment and the technical expertise to study them or prove that you could do what they claimed that you could do. Over the show and tell. Show us what you got. So that's what we would do at Area 51. They'd bring it out there. And that's the reason I said it was boring. When we started doing stealth, they had the weirdest looking thing that we'd put on the pole and it shined like a barn. Well, they took it back and we didn't hear from them for another 3 months. And we didn't really have that much going on. That's the reason I said it was boring. Uh, and they'd bring it back and we'd put it on the pole. They would shape it and everything, and the signature would be different. And they'd take it back and change it again. And finally got where, and we'd have to put a thumbtack on in the prototype where it ping the radar where we see a reference of where it
Wow.
was. Got where a bird landing on it would shine more than what we was looking at. And in the case of the aircraft, it got where the rims on the pilot's glasses would shine more, show up more than the plane, the prototypes and stuff. And so we went through a lot of proof of concepts out there that if people actually saw them, they would think, boy, that is a UFO. But like the bird of prey and the whale, we can talk about the Tackett Blue. That's some of them that have been declassified. The whale, we called it, that's the weirdest looking thing you ever saw, but it produced the B-2 bomber. It produced a lot of the cruise missiles. It's fly by air, by wire
Mhm.
technology.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of that kind of. But the CIA, you got to give them credit. They were the father of all that kind of stuff. Dick Bessel insisted that the A-12 would be stealth, and Kelly Johnson kind of opposed it. And Dick got really hard with it. Hey, if you can't do it, we'll get someone else that will.
Well, for a
And
while there, Kelly Johnston was working on different designs, and he could make a plane that could fly really high and really fast, or he could make a plane that could be stealthy, but he was having trouble getting them to do both at the same time. And he finally kind of
exactly.
gave up on it, and he gave the CIA the A-11, and it was a non-stealthy design, but it would fly really high and really fast. And they said, no, we need it to be as low observable to radar as possible. And he went back to the drawing board and came up with the A-12, and that was just fantastic. Kind of, gave him a challenge, and he rose to it.
Yeah, we learned a lot from that, and then uh, even the MiGs that we brought in, we got where everything that we get our hands on, we'd put it on the pole, the pylon, we call it the pole, and look at it with the radar. And we got where we could detect the radar signature, identify different planes just by the radar signature. And that was something that really wasn't on the book. That wasn't a real project at the beginning. After we'd have chow us engineers with board. We didn't play much poker. We ended up back down at our workshop because we had all these toys there and was curious about things. And it was really into that radar signature thing. And we put everything we get our hands on out on the pylon or out on the lake bed and look at it with our radar. And that became a real project just from us wanting something to do out of boredom. And there's a little story, the Air Force started landing planes out there off of the box, we called it back then. It became Dreamland and Red Square and different names, but they called it the box. No fly zone, restricted zone. and it always cheers. And so it got a couple of them declared emergencies and landed there. And they go back and Nellis said, "Oh man, you ought to see what's out there, you know." And we had one land in F-105. You know, well, there wasn't anything wrong. He declared emergency, landed. He wants to see what was out there. Well, we kept the pilot for quite some time debriefing him, but we refused to give Nellis their plane back. And we actually rigged up a makeshift pylon and put that plane on it out on the dry lake bed and sent Nellis a picture of their plane sitting on the pylon.
Oh, God.
And that stopped all the emergency flights out there.
That actually ties perfectly into the next question from Nick Taylor. Were there any pranks played during testing while you were out there? That is a perfect example for that.
Oh my God. I I got to tell you about Frank Murray. Frank Murray he was the F-101 pilot before he became an A-12 pilot. And would do weather flights before the A-12 would take off, and they'd head up toward Idaho in the F-101. Well, Frank Murray, he was kind of a prankster, and one day it was snowing like crazy up there, and he saw this snowplow plowing the road, the highway, you know, and he's on his way back to Area 51. And he put that food F-101 in an afterburner, and the pilot stopped to take a whiz. As Frank said, paint his name in the snow. While he was doing that, Frank buzzed him right above the top of his vehicle. It just scared that poor guy to death. Yes, there's a lot of pranks. On the X-15 range, we did a weather flight before any flight, and they'd come out of Edwards, and they'd be reporting, usually two planes, and what they're doing is going up and check the lake bed, make sure there hadn't rained or no one was camping on it, and all that kind of stuff, you know. Well, our radar thought was in direct line of flight to the lake beds. Those pilots be reporting that they were at 45,000 or whatever back to the home base. They'd be right on the deck, and they'd come right up the side of our mountain, and they'd crisscross. They'd time it where they crisscross the top of our building. I mean, not 10 feet above it. You smell the fuel in the air. But the portion of the ceiling tiles that we had in the roof, it just scrambled everything. We didn't dare turn on any of our electronic equipment, because back then we used electron tubes. It knocked the filaments out of the tubes when they go over, you know.
Oh my gosh.
So, we always played games.
That's awesome. Skywatcher is asking, and don't answer that if you don't feel comfortable answering it. Do you still have your access badge?
No, I don't. Some of them did, but no. Once you left, that was it. And this is on our 50th anniversary of the CA of Area 51 and the U2. Well, they wanted one of the early U2 guys to go out there for the 50th anniversary, and we paid Hank Meyerdirk. I think Pete knew him. Anyway, he lived here in Las Vegas, and we arranged for him to go out there, and they arranged it through me, actually through my daughter, because she was actually his chaperone because she was working out there, but they arranged it through me to get him out there, and he was on oxygen, so they had to get special oxygen tanks for him for the flight and everything, and so I made all the arrangements, but they wouldn't let me go. I didn't get to go. So no, I never set foot back on the range after I left there. No.
Yeah. Let's see. Jeff York is asking, did you all have an Area 51 baseball league?
We had a softball league. We were the the 51ers, I guess it was. Yeah, we had a softball league, and we played.
It was the 8-ballers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and we played like they had a team over on the atomic bomb side. We played with them. Oh yeah, we had a softball team.
I remember reading about that in some Nevada test site newsletters, and it made reference to the Area 51 8-ballers playing against like the Area 12 Mets and the motor pool truckers and all these guys. And it named some of the 8-baller players, like Big Clem Bajeski and Harry Martin. And I got to meet those guys when I joined the Roadrunners. That was great. It was wonderful meeting these guys and talking to them
We
about
had some
that.
pretty good players out there. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, I think he's one of our German viewers. Jochen asks, I really like your planes on the shelf in the background. Were those ones that you had personal experience with?
I worked with every one of them. And you'll
Yeah.
see my missiles. Like I said, I was a missile man
Just
first. So
move
I
it
got
over
the
here a
Nike
little bit.
Hercules over there, the Hawk missiles, and then I worked on every one of those planes.
Yeah, I see you've got the X-15 up there, the Blackbird, the M2F1 lifting body. Lot of great research aircraft from those days.
Good
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
Okay, next question. Let's see. Fulton Matt, I've always wondered if the intelligence community truly never returned to the airplane business after handing Groom over to the Air Force.
Well,
Uh,
if I can address that a little bit, the the intelligence community definitely did get back into the airplane business. Really, it was the CIA that pretty much pioneered the drones that we know today, starting with they had the Nat 750, I think it was called, and that sort of paved the way for what eventually became the MQ-1 and then the MQ-9 Reaper family, and you've got just built
yeah,
out from there. There's many different types of unmanned aerial vehicles that were spawned by the needs of the intelligence community, and now they serve both civilian intel community and also the military, depending on the mission.
yeah, we did the Aquiline. Are you familiar with it, Pete? The CIA developed it looked like a bird, a big bird, and it was powered by a saw motor, a chainsaw motor,
Chainsaw motor, yeah, yeah.
chainsaw motor. And this thing would fly above highline wires. And I think it had a range like 1,000 miles. It had a long range, but it'd take photographs and send them up to a U-2 plane or a satellite. We didn't have many satellites then, so mostly a U-2 plane. But we developed that out at Area 51. And in fact, Hank Meyerdirk was head of that. Hank got out of the Air Force and then went to work for the CIA here full time and came back out. He was out there. Hank was out there for the U-2 program. He was an instructor pilot for the U-2 program on the first U-2 pilots. And then he came out there as with the A-12, and then he went back to CIA and then came back out there 51 for Aqualine.
When I met Hank with Roadrunners, he told me about Aquiline. I'd never heard of it before, of course. Nobody had really outside the program. And eventually, the CIA began to declassify documents on it. One of the parts of my book, Dreamland: Secret History of Area 51, that I was most happy writing was the history of the Aquiline program. And it was a fascinating program. At one point, they were considering using uh, basically a nuclear battery to give it a virtually unlimited range. But for the test
Mm-hmm.
program, like you say, they ended up with kind of a chainsaw engine. But yeah, that was a really interesting idea of making a drone that would sort of just look like a bird, and people wouldn't pay attention to it, and would do its mission and send its pictures.
Well, I often credit with the Reaper and the Predator coming maybe from that type of technology. Um, but
Excuse
yeah,
me.
but we were testing that while I was out there. And
A lot of the things that were going on that helped make that a successful, well, I should say semi-successful program. It did get canceled, unfortunately, but the pioneering work on microelectronics really is what made it possible.
do you know why it's canceled?
Yeah, in fact, that was part of the stuff I wrote in the book there. Yeah, and Hank had a really low opinion of the manufacturer as far as that went.
That's it exactly. I was wondering if he told you that.
Yeah. He was not shy about giving his opinion.
He, they called the manufacturer, and I'm not going to name them. They called them in back to CIA headquarters, and and Hank was spilling the beans on them, and they're raking them over the post. And I don't know was Dick Bissell or who at CIA. But anyway, they asked Hank, said, "What do you think we ought to do?" And he said, "I think we ought to cancel the damn thing." And they did. And then the Army picked it up, I understand, later and continued with it. But they canceled it because the contractor was gouging them
Yeah.
financially. They were really taking advantage of them.
An interesting thing, once the program had finally been canceled, and they briefly considered reinstating it, but they canceled it altogether. They gave the remaining vehicles and equipment to the Army, as you say, and one of those vehicles at least survived, and it's in a museum. It's in an Army Aviation Museum in Alabama.
I didn't realize that.
All right, we still got a few questions to go through. S. Walker, can you talk about the radar detection systems designed to detect the plasma signature of these craft?
Not the
I'm not very
we
familiar with that
experiment.
technology.
We experimented with plasma guns for stealth purposes on the A-12, but the shielding of it, the weight of the shielding that be required to protect the pilot made it unfeasible to continue.
Yeah.
But we trying everything in the world, CIA was, to make the A-12 stealthy. We tried a number of things, I don't know about the question. Was he? I'm sorry, what he was referred to.
He's asking for the plasma signatures of aircraft.
Oh, okay. The plasma from the exhaust, we added cesium to the fuel to ionize the plume of the exhaust, so that for stealth purposes. So we used the additive cesium for that.
Yeah, the cesium salts. I remember reading about that, and Lockheed kind of pioneered that and used as sort of a basic approach to stealth in their early research.
Yeah, I don't know. Did the SRC the one use that? I don't recall.
I
I
I
doubt it.
know
I
they were
doubt
talking.
it because they weren't trying to be stealth.
Yeah, well, the although the SR-71 did have the same kind of anti-radar treatments as the A-12 in terms of
Yeah,
the composite materials around the edges and the
exactly. Yeah.
special plastics and all that. I don't know if they used the cesium salts or not, though.
I don't think they did. I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that.
All right, next question from Nick Taylor again. Is there a listing of projects that are declassified, or is it up to you to research press releases to see what you can talk about? In other words, how do
No,
you know what you can talk about?
they declare. Okay, first of all, when I wrote my books, they had to be approved, and still do by the CA. They run it through a process back there. Everyone that worked for the CA has to get their books approved. So they go through and make sure that there's nothing in there that's classified. But everything that I've talked about, we've openly talked about it for years. Uh, there's nothing that's and we would know we don't talk about what the Air Force what they're doing now. We
Right,
don't cross that line.
right,
We speculate and we know some of it, but we don't cross that line.
right, right. Yeah, exactly. And I guess it comes down to it's mostly a common sense approach. You kind of
Yeah,
know
it is.
what's
It is. Yeah,
still sensitive and what is not.
you know what would benefit what the enemy. And when we did the website, the Chinese aid crawled all over that website, so I went to New York with no about being webmaster. I went back to security at CIA and said, "Man, they're all over us," and they looked at it and said, "Ah, there's nothing there. They're just harvesting, looking for something. There's nothing there."
Yeah,
But
good.
everything we put on the website that I thought might be sensitive, I would run it by security at the agency before I do it.
Yeah. All right, next question from Bob, 7501. Were motor vehicles available to you for travel around the base, or did you have to walk everywhere?
No, we had vehicle. We had sedans, and we flew up there. But we had once we got there, we had vehicles. Yes.
Yeah. And I think nowadays you can still see it. And I'm hopefully not giving anything secret away. If you look at satellite images, you can see a bunch of cars sitting outside the Janet terminal at Area 51.
Yeah.
And other
Yeah.
times there's no cars at all. Everybody is at their work spot and they take all the cars. So
We went through a period out there for about a couple of weeks. I don't know what it was that we weren't able to fly. The AEC provided us with limo, had Atomic Energy Commission on the side of it, and we drove from for 2 or 3 weeks, and that's kind of unique, you know.
all right, this is just a comment from Alexander. I just purchased The Secret Genesis of Area 51 from Apple Books. I'm looking forward to sitting and reading this. Jeff York, did high-level government officials ever visit the site like a president?
No president's ever been out there, and and we didn't allow congressmen. We were very tough on who could come out there. If you just because you're a congressman, you couldn't come out there. But the presidents never went for one reason: they didn't want to know what we were doing. They gave them plausible deniability.
Uh-huh.
That's one of the reasons we filtered everything. They didn't want to know because we were doing things that they did. It put them on a hot spot. Let me give you a good example. When we flying the U-2s out of Turkey over Russia, over the Soviet Union, well, there's some flights for political reasons or whatever. The president would turn us down. They didn't want us flying them. We had some pilots out of the United Kingdom from England was attached to us. We would let them fly the mission instead. We'd go ahead and fly the mission, but it would be a British pilot instead of us. So we still accomplished. So yeah, we that's some of the stuff we did. But we had I think it was 4 British pilots trained in the U-2, and one of them got killed by Amarillo, Texas. But yeah, when we get turned down for a mission that we really thought we needed to make, we would just okay, we'll use someone else to fly it. And it's plausible deniability. We could see actually not. Hey, we didn't fly.
To get back to the question a little bit, there were a number of VIPs, military officials and government officials, CIA. In the 1970s, the director of the CIA went out there.
Oh yeah,
and that was George H.W. Bush. So he became president later, but he didn't go there as president.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We did have high-ranking people, but not politicians. I guess I should have said that.
Yeah. Well, I think it also.
We like. Our brass at CA was down there all the time. They'd love to come there if it's one. Yeah. Particularly on Thursday night, that was steak night. Everybody showed up on Thursday night for steak. We had absolutely the best food in the world. You ask anyone that ever worked out there during the CIA era, what's the best thing they ever remember? It was the food. 24 hours a day, we had the best food in the world. And the most famous person that ever worked at Area 51, up to even today, was Murphy Green, our cook. Everyone knew Murphy Green. Even he stayed there even after CIA was going to understand. And but Murphy Green was famous. He was I don't know if you're familiar with in the movie Seinfeld movie, with the Nazi King. Those of you,
soup Nazi. Soup
Nazi. Murphy Green was the soup Nazi. I don't care who you were. It was his mess hall, and you went by his rules. I don't care if you were Kelly Johnson. You went by Murphy Green's rules. And, I mean, he was tough.
Awesome. But that's a great photo There's a great photo of Murphy Green posing with
On
a
the lake.
fishing rod on the dry lake
Yes.
bed, like he's fishing.
The one year CIA contacted me and wanted to know what Murphy Green was a black man, and CIA contacted me and said, what was the most famous black man to work out there? Well, there wasn't that many, first of all, for security clearances reason or whatever. But I told him, I said, Murphy Green. I told him the story on Murphy Green, and they published that in their what are they published back at the headquarters. But he was the most famous man to work out there. Everybody knew his name. Well, the rest of us weren't supposed to exist. We used, I don't know if your listeners know this, we used pseudo names. We didn't use our real names. The pilots all had a name. They got the names off of gravestones in Europe. And all the pilots and everybody used a pseudo name. My group, we had code name. My code name was Thunder. And that's what everybody knew me as Thunder. And
Huh.
And little things like that, a lot of people don't realize that. Even the Air Force never knew about that, of using pseudo names. They go over the roster. We got a roster of everyone that ever flew a Blackbird. Air Force, CIA, Lockheed, everyone. And a few years ago, they got all excited. They saw the name on it no one recognized. And it was the base commander out of Air 51 under his pseudo name.
Next question is from Jochen again, from our German viewer. Was the cesium radioactive?
Yes,
Would
it
be.
would be, yeah, with a low level
It would be, yeah, it was.
radioactivity.
Yeah, you got a lot of people now that know that we had it, or claiming that it caused illness and stuff like that, but we don't know of anyone. You mentioned Harry Martin. He was in charge of our fuel system at Area 51. And he heard from him last week. He's healthy as a bird, and he's 90-something years old now. So, no.
All
And
right.
he was one of the youngest guys out there.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
We're almost at the hour and a half mark, so we're gonna have to start winding it down here. We still have a few questions. Actually, this is just Ollie from Ostfriesland, from one of our German viewers. He must be up very early or very late, I guess. It's deep at night in Germany right now. And thank you, Ollie, for listening to us. Jeff York, could I get hired out? Could I get hired on to be a janitor at Area 51? How did you go about getting hired at Area 51?
This was very difficult. You got recruited. You didn't, it didn't, in our day, it didn't exist. So you couldn't put in an application. Hey, I want to work at Area 51. They came to you. We were all recruited because of our skills and what have you. And, but most of the people who worked out there worked for a company and our contractor, and they would get clearance from to work out there. But you didn't. Probably the cooks back then. I think all the cooks worked for Rico. They all worked for a company.
Yeah.
So the company would select who went out there and get them cleared. And there's no. The place doesn't exist, so you can't apply for a job there.
Right. Well, I think that would probably be disqualify you right there. If you ask, well, how can I get a job at Area 51? That's probably the best way to disqualify you right there. Okay. Well, as Walker, I was referring to plasma or radiation signatures of UFOs. I don't know if you're serious, as Walker. I don't know much about the plasma radiation signatures of UFOs.
Yeah.
We never
pretty
saw
sure.
anything like that. No,
So
nothing like that.
I think we're pretty much through the list of questions. Okay, here's another one. With nuclear testing next door, did you ever have to evacuate the base during a test? If not, were you ever there at the time of a blast?
Yeah, we would evacuate for the test and then come back in. Usually 2 or 3 days later, we'd come back in and we'd dust all the dust off of our equipment and go back to work. We'd have a little bit of damage. If the we're talking about the atmospheric test. The underground test didn't affect us that much, but if they were close by, yes, we would evacuate. But when they're doing the atmospheric test, we'd evacuate and then come back and just dust everything off and go back to work.
Yeah,
And that's what always amazed us is we did not have any health problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
the underground,
amazing
the underground testing, was designed to contain most of the radionuclides below the surface, but occasionally
yes, exactly.
they would vent and some of the radiation would get off site. There were radiation monitoring stations at Groom Lake to keep track of that.
We all wore radiation dosimeters and film badges just as though we were at the on the atomic bomb range. Yes, and they would gather them up and test them, make sure that we hadn't contacted any radiation.
Well, I think we're pretty much through with the questions, and we will definitely have to do another stream if you're up for it.
It'll be fun, yeah.
I think it was great. And TD and Peter, thank you so much, both of you, for doing this today. I think we all had fun. I think it shows.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
sounds good.
Thank you all for being here. So with that, the next stream is going to be on January 16th. Peter Merlin is going to be back on the stream. We're going to be talking about the A12 project. It may actually be a two-part project. We may talk about the A12 in more general terms, and then a follow-up show a little bit more about the technology. The next live stream for members is going to be on January 3. It's a Saturday, not on the 2nd, but on the 3rd, on Saturday. Member live stream. If you want to become a member, let me switch the screens here. If you want to become a member for less than the cost of a cup of coffee, you can become a member. You're supporting my work, and I'm not going to get rich off this, but I'm going to make a little money to further my hobby and so forth, bring you the latest and greatest. Just hit the join button on my main page, on the YouTube page, and we will definitely do another live stream with TD in the future. Thank you all for tuning in today, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas. We will see you soon. And with that, we will go to that amazing theme song. You all have a great weekend and a Merry Christmas.
30 years ago, he walked away, left Germany behind, built a life his way. Rachel, Nevada, dust and light, jets in the sky, no aliens inside. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland resort for 30 years strong, Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts, his legacy. The signals run wild, YouTube in his heart, camera live. The FBI came but they can't break him down, his fire keeps burning, it won't drown. A hat in the wind, his pickup rolls, an iron will and a heart of gold. Dreamland resort for 30 years strong, Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hard cold facts, his legacy. legacy. 30 years of desert, 30 years of dust, eyes on the truth, in truth he trusts. Dreamland Resort for 30 years strong, Area 51 is where he belongs. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hardcore facts, his legacy. Dreamland Resort, he still won't bend. The truth in the sky will guide till the end. No hocus pocus, no fantasy, just hardcore facts, his legacy. Support the man who brings the truth alive on Dreamland Resort, where freedom survives. Donate for Jerk, he'll thank you true. He lives his dream, nothing breaks through.